So good evening, everyone. Like I said again, we have our speaker here today. His name is Casey Spackman. He's the NMSU Rangeland Specialist from New Mexico State University. Casey Spackman earned his bachelor's degree in animal science and PhD in range science from Utah State University. During his degrees, he worked for the USDA ARS Poisonous Plant Research Laboratory and the Department of Wildland Resource at USU as a research technician. He began working for New Mexico State University at the beginning of 2020 as an assistant professor and extension range management specialist. He has expertise in livestock grazing behavior, invasive plant management, poisonous plants, ecology and plant physiology, rangeland monitoring, and revegetation efforts. His extension efforts aim to assist producers, land managers, and agency personnel in monitoring and developing management objectives that maintain or improve natural resource conditions. So with that being said, Casey, thank you for being here today with us. I'll go ahead and pass the floor on to you now. Oh, by the way, Casey, your screen is split, if that makes sense.
Let's see.
There you go.
There we go. Hi, everyone, and welcome. That was quite a introduction, a long-winded one. Yeah, so I am the Extension Range Management Specialist for New Mexico State University. I'm grateful for the NSA project and all they do, specifically on this webinar series concerning drought. Looks like they've had the past couple of weeks very informative sessions. And so now I'll present a little bit on livestock drought management, more specifically in a general umbrella on drought management. If you've tuned in before, I've presented for NSA before, this will be very similar to a previous presentation I gave. I've adapted a little bit to address the livestock portion of it, but it will be very similar to that. But going forward, so the first question I really like to ask people is, how do you know you are in a drought? I mean, it seems like pretty intuitive, or I don't like saying dumb because there's no dumb questions, right? But I like asking this question because it sets the stage for questioning what is the norm and what is the abnormal conditions on rangelands. But really, think about that for a minute. How do you know you are in drought? And how specifically, how do you think about measuring that? So there's key things. So measurable indicators. I emphasize that again. We have to have quantitative things to estimate anything. So in relation to drought, we have a few key indicators that help us decide if we're in drought or not. So the first one is climate indicators. And if any of you have been to the drought monitoring website, this is what you're going to see. So this is, I just barely pulled this today and put it on here. So it's a little behind, right? A lot of the state has been receiving precipitation this last week, and they only update it once a week. So it's going to change a little bit next week, because right now, if we look at the New Mexico Index, we're in a pretty, we're in an extreme to exceptional drought. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So think about climate indicators. What in the climate do you assess to determine if you're in a drought or not? The next one, vegetation indicators. A few people look at this because it's critical to your livestock operations. If you don't have forage because of the drought, well, you're hurting, or you don't have a ranching operation. You can't run livestock if you don't have food for them. And then lastly is the animal aspect. How many of you use your animals as indicators of drought? So we'll dive into those three key topics to explain drought. And then after we're done talking about those, we'll give a little bit of insight in how you can address drought in your management practices. Now, I will put a clause in there. I don't have a silver bullet. I wish I did for drought. That would be super nice if I could. Well, I probably wouldn't be a professor. I'd be sitting on some beach, nice and happy with all the money that I'd make, right? So remember this. Let's take a look into your vegetation indicators. If you're looking at your vegetation indicators, look at the past. Good drought management occurs prior to the drought. So last year's vegetation will determine the success during drought. If you've got persistent drought, well, that's a different story. You may have to look back a few years. So a couple of key species here. One that's nutritious and one that's just okay. So which plant are you looking at as an indicator? Because 3 on, the Aristida species, that one will persist better in drought. It's more drought tolerant than your Cytodes grama, which is less tolerant to drought. So what plants are you using as your indicators? So this may be a little elementary to education, but it's the basic physiology of a plant. So what a plant does is it takes, in order to grow, mature, and reproduce seeds and produce offspring for the subsequent years, you have to have sunlight, which when you have sunlight, it takes in carbon dioxide. When we have water, it helps to uptake minerals and nutrients. And what do we get in return for plants? Well, plants produce oxygen for us to breathe, us and our animals, and they provide a food source also. So if you're looking at agronomy, they produce sugars for our food sources and grasses for our livestock. So in drought, we knock out a couple of those key things. And so now without water, you don't get mineral and nutrient uptake. It's a chain reaction, right? If you don't get mineral and nutrient uptake, then you interrupt the cycle of plant growth, so you don't get oxygen and sugar. The key thing here is with drought, you're getting this sunlight. Photosynthesis does not occur. And what does it do if it's not being absorbed for growth? Well, you start getting burnt plants. Just like if we were to stay out in the sun for a long time, we're going to end up getting sunburnt or just plain hot. And that's exactly what will happen to our plants during drought. So here's a general growth curve. Now I want to note here, this is a growth curve for cool season grasses taken from and adapted from the USDA. So the key concept here is root reserves. So in drought, your roots become the critical component of your forage species, particularly grass. So there's times when They're grazable, and you're not going to hurt those root reserves. And there's other times if you graze it, then you'll hurt those reserves, and it'll the plant will suffer. So key components of this. I talked about that. When do you graze? And what are your current root reserves? What kind of nutrients do you have below ground? So if you think about that in general of plants, then you can assess, well, what am I doing to the plant with grazing? How heavy do you graze? So this scenario here, if you graze light to moderate, which is suggested in the scientific literature, you're not hurting those root reserves. You're actually helping the plant out, because what it does is it removes the old plant mass that's above ground and allows those new shoots to come up, which increases the amount of sun and carbon dioxide it can take in, which jumpstarts the cycle of taking up those nutrients. If you do heavy to severe grazing, well, it takes more energy to replace the above ground, and so it starts to deplete those. Now, I will note here with your grazing, and particularly with drought. So 1 year of drought is not necessarily going to hurt your plants if you graze heavy or severe. It's the persistent heavy to severe grazing that's going to deplete your root reserves and then have the potential, if when drought comes along, I'm not going to say if, when, we are in New Mexico, when the drought comes, they don't have those root reserves, and your plants are going to die off if you persistently graze it heavy. And so I think I jumped ahead of myself a little bit in that last slide. How severe is the drought? So think of drought as a natural occurring disturbance. Disturbance is not bad. Disturbance is actually a good thing for plants. So if you just have a single year of disturbance, that's fine. It's when you have persistent heavy disturbance, persistent heavy, I guess you could call disturbance stress. Let's substitute disturbance for stress. Just like us, if we have persistent stress put upon us, we can only take it for so long. It's the exact same concept with our vegetation on the ground. The more persistent a drought is, the more those root reserves are depleted, because the plant is, all it's trying to do is just survive that stress. A single year of drought doesn't do much damage. It's like a single year of heavy grazing. It's not going to hurt the plant that bad. They will bounce back. Now, this is where it gets a little more complicated. It's called the compounding effect. So if you have multiple stressors, then that's where you start hurting your plants. So if you're doing grazing plus drought, think about those root reserves and what's happening below ground, because ultimately that will influence how tolerant the plant is and how well it can bounce back from those stressors. So for instance, if you're grazing heavy and have a persistent drought, you're going to kill the plants. You're going to overwhelm them with that stress. You're going to deplete all their energy reserves below ground, and they can't withstand it. If you do light grazing and have a single year of drought, well, you're not going to hurt them that much. So this is kind of where, no, it's not kind of, it is where the art of range management comes in. We've got to assess roughly how heavy or how light we're grazing. We've got to look at things and say, well, and make judgment calls of, well, or what happens if we get into a persistent drought, 2 or 3 years of drought, what's going to happen if we persistently graze? And so I'll emphasize that, and I'll talk about this, you need a drought plan in place. There's no way I can sugarcoat that one. If you don't have a drought plan in place, put one down. So the importance of monitoring for drought planning. So there's a few things that you can monitor. So you can just take general photos, which is an ocular estimate. You can take production estimates, so both annual and what has been grazed, which is what we call residual production. Different species on the landscape. So I talked about that a little bit. We had the picture of the two species, right? So we had three on and side oats grama side by side in a previous picture. So one species is tolerant to drought and the other is not. So you're going to see increases and decreases in different species. So it's important to monitor those and make sure that you're not promoting a monoculture and that you have a diverse landscape of different grass species. Stubble heights and cover. So that's a lot of things, right? So those were the general monitoring principles or areas. But which one is the most important? If during drought, if you don't have time for anything else, what are the most important things to monitor during drought? Production, right? Or another word for that is biomass. Why? Well, it gives you an estimate of what's available for your livestock to consume. Pretty important. It's also going to tell you what the plant health is doing. What are those reserves that you've got going on below the ground? Stubble heights, another one that you can do. I put that as number 2 because that's a threshold of grazing, a general threshold. If you go below that a little bit, it's not going to be too detrimental, but you start going below that threshold over a long period of time, just like if drought persists over a long period of time, then you're going to start knocking out those plants. And then the other ones are just extra, so that's where I put them. But those 2 are the most important ones. And then, so I won't get into the techniques of monitoring. If you'd like more on that, there's some videos on how to monitor on our Facebook website. It's called, you can find it, NMSU Rangelands, and it has a couple of videos on there that you can watch and learn how to monitoring using a producer-based monitoring method. So biomass or production, very briefly and quickly, it's the clip and weigh method. You have a hoop or a square of a known area, you clip it, you dry the samples that are in that, you weigh it in grams, you record it, and then Utah State University came up with this range and hoop square conversion table, and you just times it. So the hoop that you see there in the picture, you times it by 100 because it is exactly 0.98, or yeah, the circumference is 3.5 feet. So 0.9, I think it's 0.98 square feet in that hoop. So it's a really easy conversion, really quick. Again, look at that Facebook video, and it can tell you how to monitor and train you a little bit. Stubble heights, I talked about that. Remember this basic principle for drought. Above ground generally equals below ground. So whatever you're measuring your plant heights in general, that's what's going to be below ground when it's ungrazed. It's different when you're taking measurements of grazed plants. It gives you a potential stocking rate, right? So when you collect biomass samples and combine them with stubble heights, you can get an estimate of what the capacity of your land is. Here's some fun facts for you. I don't know if they're that full, but they are, or that fun, but they are drought facts. So for instance, forage production during drought. This is why it's important to monitor, because you can experience a 7-fold decline in production. That's not saying that your plants are dying. That's just saying that sun is baking those, and their forage quantity is shrinking by 7-fold. So you're just not going to have much there to consume, and that's why it's important to take those biomass samples. You can also get high mortality. This is ungrazed plants. You can get up to 50% with a drought, and with grazed plants, you can get greater than 50%. Again, it all depends on those root reserves. There's no good way to quantitatively assess the root reserves or the energy that's contained below ground. So it's that art I was talking about. So look at your plants above ground. Remember, above ground equals below ground. So when you start seeing less and less above ground, you're getting less and less below ground and depleting those root reserves. Another thing is, so if you are doing light to moderate grazing, and for instance, down in Cruces where I'm at, 1 year of drought, you need about 2 years of recovery for those plants to get back to what it was before drought. So you need to adjust your stocking rates accordingly. That's not to say you can't graze the immediate year after a drought. It's just saying that be very cautious. Maybe run a lighter stocking rate the following year. But if you graze high to severe in an arid system like we've got in New Mexico, it's 5+ years, or you may not get recovery. Like that previous slide, you may have a bunch of plants that end up dying, a lot of mortality. So again, it comes down to an art and a judgment of how you should graze. And so monitoring is key to all of this, keeping those records. So here's one. The animal as an indicator. I've seen some cattle look like this on the rangelands. So what's their body condition score? If you're not familiar with body condition scores or the scoring system, it's a 1 to 9 system based on basically the fat content and how many ribs you can see, just how fleshy they are. If you want more information on this, the university has a great publication out there. It's Circular 575. So you can look at that, and this table is actually part of that circular that you can look at and judge body condition scores. So ideally, a good healthy cow is in that 5 to 6 range for their body condition scores. So why, or should I say, how is the animal an indicator? Well, it comes down to performance. I talk a lot about vegetation. That's my specialty because I feel like the food that the livestock are eating will make or break a ranching operation. It's because the forage or grasses are the main source of energy for these livestock. Anytime those forages become depleted, they have what they call compensation. So they've got to meet their dietary needs just like you and I need to meet dietary needs. So what do we do when we don't have enough food in our fridge? We look for our alternative sources. We start going out and maybe we go to a restaurant or a fast food place to get some food. Livestock do the exact same thing. So when their grasses become depleted, when their forages become depleted, they start seeking out every other things. So maybe they start nibbling on shrubs and brush, trying to compensate for that lack of nutrition. Anytime you start looking elsewhere for forages in livestock, it reduces their performance. So keep that in mind. So when you have a persistent drought and you have a 7-fold decline in your forages, we need to start thinking a little bit about maybe some supplementation, hay, cubes, tubs, things like that. Not only does it reduce the performance of the livestock, but how about their general health? So you get some disease immunity suppression, which is an interesting topic. Now, I am not a veterinarian, so I'm not going to elaborate more on that, but it does happen. Anytime the performance goes down, their immune system goes down, and you have an increased chance of disease and sickness. Now, that compensation, the plants they normally eat, they probably don't eat for a reason. If they start searching out other forages, there is an increased poison risk. So a lot of those forages that they don't eat, they don't eat for a reason. It's because they contain toxins that make their stomach upset or are potentially lethal. So we need to keep good forages on the ground. We need to have a drought management strategy in place, whether that be reduced stocking rate or supplementation, just to offset the risk of poisoning and consuming something they shouldn't. What's interesting about performance of animals during drought is if you start seeing that body condition score sloughing off is what they call it, or losing body condition scores, it's exponential, meaning once it starts, it'll start off slow and then it'll speed up rapidly, and before you know it, you have animals that are in that 3 to 2 category, which if you're trying to feed out a drought, that is a bad strategy, because one of the things in drought that we need to look at with livestock is playing those markets, right? If you try feeding out of drought and miss that window, everybody else is trying to sell their cattle at the same time. Livestock prices are going to be in the bottom, and your livestock have lost their body condition score and don't have as much meat and fat on them. And so you can't sell them for a good price, and especially you're going to get a lower price because of the lack of market value. So it's important. I'll emphasize this again and again. Have something in writing, some sort of drought management plan for your vegetation and your livestock. Let's see. All right, let's look at the weather. So I'm sure that the other presentations, if you tuned into them, went over a lot of this stuff. But I always ask this. If I can get it to go to the next slide. There we go. Do you trust the data? And then I have to follow up with that. Why? Do you trust this drought index? Do you even know what the drought index is? There are weaknesses and there are strengths to it. I I would trust it to a degree to give you a general evaluation of what's currently happening and what's happened in the past. But I would not use it as a predictor for the future. That's not what it's made for. It can give you an estimate, but I wouldn't rely on that estimate. We can't predict if the rain's going to fall, so that's the reason I would not definitively trust the index. It just gives you a general idea of where we stand at this point. So at this point, we're in extreme to exceptional drought. 90% of the state is in those two categories. This is going to change next week with the rain we've been getting. We've had some good rain. So here are the things that they use in that drought index to help in assessing it. So I'm not going to go through all these, but I am going to focus on this. What this is called is a standard precipitation index, fancy word for recording what precipitation you've had and averaging it over the years. That's all it is. It's very basic. So here you go. This is over 120 years of precipitation in New Mexico. The red line indicates the precipitation and where we are at for that particular year. So, and then you see the grayed out area in the middle. The yellow line is the averages. The grayed area, anytime you get outside of that, is considered drought. So, in the 31 of the last 120 years, we were in severe drought. That means 75% or more below the average precipitation. So that's why I say it's not a matter of if drought comes, it's a matter of when. So 31 of the last 120 years in drought, which now I ask, how often does drought occur in New Mexico? So the past 22 years, so that was what, 40% of the last 120 years that were in drought. Now, the last 20 years, we've been in drought 60% of the time. And that's kind of the running average. It's about 60% of the time. So that's why it's so important to have a drought plan in place. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So here's a solution for you. I talked about quantifying your animal conditions. I talked about quantifying your vegetation, quantify the weather. I know a lot of ranchers have the old cups on a fence post with a gauge. That's great. That's all you need, as long as you're recording that and keeping track of it. What about your water sources during drought? This is something that is often missed. People often look at, what are my cows doing, and what are my livestock, not just cows and sheep. What are the livestock doing, and also what is my vegetation doing? Not many people think about what's happening to my water sources during drought. So as drought increases, you get a lack of precipitation. Unless you've got perennial water flowing into those tubs or dirt tanks or whatever you have to water them, you start increasing evaporation. With evaporation comes a mineral accumulation. That can cause toxicities, so we need to be mindful of that. If we start running dry in locations, then the animals have to walk farther, and that poses a problem for range conditions, because then they're not going to travel as far to consume food. So you get overutilization around those watering sources, you get a general decrease in animal performance, and it's just a chain reaction. With drought, you get increased temperature in those troughs. And with increased temperatures, we get algae and bacterial blooms, which can be detrimental to your livestock. So these are some of the things to consider in a drought monitoring plan. What are we going to do with our water sources, and how can we offset these things? I know one of the things people do is the shade balls, or some of them actually put a cover over the top so that the sun can't cause evaporation in some of those troughs. That may not be feasible on some areas. It just depends on your watering source. But keep your water sources in mind. All right. So, kind of in summary, we're not quite to the end yet, but the only way to know is through measurable indicators. There's many. So you need to plan. Well, first you need to monitor and plan. I should flip those two around. You need to monitor and you need to plan for drought. It will come. So monitor your vegetation trends. So if you've got a 5 to 10 year record, you've got a pretty good baseline of what your vegetation is going to do. And I almost guarantee that sometime in those 5 to 10 years, you've had a drought, maybe 1, maybe 2 years. So you can get a baseline of what's going to happen during those years, and you can assess, all right, what do I do with my livestock? Do I sell during that time? Do I have alternative forages on hand? So just keep those vegetation trends in mind. Grazing records. Where in the pastures are they grazing? Are there areas during drought that you can utilize? That may take hauling water, that may take hauling supplement to those areas, but are there areas that are underutilized that can help you squeeze through a few months of drought? So the main thing there for grazing records is distribution. Water assessments, we talked about that. Livestock records, how many, when they're grazing in, when they're grazing out, what their health records are. Keeping weather records, soil characteristics will be key. Certain soils hold moisture better than others, and some may be detrimental during drought. For instance, clay soils can be detrimental during drought because they crack, and anytime they crack, they allow light and oxygen down below the soil surface and can damage some of those root structures. So here's some considerations for drought planning, and I think I've covered a few of these. I know I've covered the first one. Are you getting tired of me saying this? Have a drought management plan in place. Write it down and look to the past years. It's bad management to plan during a drought. It's better to plan the previous years and look to the future for drought. Never ever try to feed out a drought. If you see your range forages going downhill, find something to offset that. Never try to feed off the range out of drought. Now, if that means, when I say feed out of drought, that's grazing. That does not include supplemental feeding. So if you have hays or things like that, that's fine during drought. It's actually trying to graze your rangelands. It leads to overgrazing. It'll kill the forages, as I talked about. It's the best way to bankrupt a ranch or an operation. That's all I got to say about that. Never try to feed out of a drought. Have herd flexibility. So one of the suggestions is, if you can, run a half and half. That means half stalker dealing with cattle, particularly. Run half stalkers and half cow calf. That way, if a drought comes, you can still keep your genetics and herd in check, but then you can sell off the other half and maintain a good healthy herd. So that herd flexibility to maintain genetics, adjusting stocking rates, selling. Just think about how you're managing your herd and what you can do to not hinder yourself if drought comes. Think about forage alternatives. So I talked a little bit about distribution, right? Do you have a drought reserve pasture that you can run to in times of drought? All that does is buy time and minimize overgrazing on your other pastures. I talked a little bit about this with, but have a destocking plan in writing. So you need to identify critical dates. Market prices. I've talked about market prices. Watch the market, because if you're trying to wait it out, you'll often lose. So plan ahead and be ready to sell and reduce your stocking rate. And grass growth there. Another topic that's becoming, I don't know if it's controversial or popular. If you want more details on this, Craig Gifford, our extension beef specialist, has a lot of information on this, or Marcy Ward, she's our livestock specialist. If you can wean early, think about that. That's about a 30% reduction in forage and water consumption just by weaning maybe a month early. So if you can do that, that's great. There is some controversy there about weaning early, though. So I've talked about grazing distribution a lot. It's just a way to offset. So it's a way to squeeze by. It's a way to offset the detrimental impacts of drought where you usually graze. So it just buys time and minimizes overgrazing. Okay, here's a concluding slide for you. Don't give in to green fever. So we're starting to get a little bit of rain. You're going to watch things green up a little bit. If you do get green grasses growing, don't increase your herd size. Remember what I said there, 1 to 2 years, or 1 year of drought, 2 years of recovery. So increasing the herd numbers immediately after a drought when things start greening up is bad management. You need to wait it out a little bit, because what happens if you increase your herd numbers and then all of a sudden we go right back into a drought? Just because it's green does not mean we're out of the drought. That's what this next one is. What if the drought persists after you get green fever? Yeah, 1 year drought, 2 years of grass recovery. So those key concepts in mind. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. A lot of this stuff is written into one of our guides that we put out. Our previous range specialist, Nick Ashcroft, put this together or reviewed it for us and reprinted it. Managing Rangelands and Cattle in Drought-Prone Areas of the Southwest. It's readily available on the NMSU website, so you can go and get that. Here's some other resources for you to help you deal with drought and livestock management. So from there, I will take questions. I see we've got a few things in the chat.
If you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. But yes, Casey, there are several questions in the chat box. The latest one I believe this person is asking, do roots start to deplete from the very bottom when the above plant part is grazed out?
Not, so yeah, that question, no, not immediately. So persistent stress. So persistent heavy grazing will do it. Persistent severe drought will do it. But what happens is as those root reserves start diminishing, it does. All the little fingers and the appendages that are clear down deep start deteriorating, and it starts doing what it does best. It wants to protect the vital organs of that plant. I guess you could call them organs, right? And so the appendages, it starts reducing the appendages. So it starts on the tips of the roots and starts shrinking down that way. But if just a general stress, no, it'll recover from that. 1 year of drought, it may take a little bit to recover those root reserves and get it back to where it was before. 1 year of heavy grazing, no, that's not going to hurt the plants. I emphasize it's that persistence, persistent grazing, persistent drought. That's what's going to start depleting and deteriorating those roots.
Thanks, Casey. And you got another question. Is your presentation available by email or can you download it?
Yes, I can make it readily available for everyone. I believe this is being recorded too, so you can watch it again on the NSA Project website and Facebook page. But yes, I can make my presentation available.
All right, thanks, Ivan, for that question. You have a hand raised. Jesse, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Casey, for your presentation. I had a couple of questions. The first question is, up here in the Four Corners region, the main grasses are Indian rice, alkali saccatone, and galleta. And I noticed that the Indian rice, is a lot more, I guess, drought tolerant. As far as nutritional value within the three grasses, which is the best for, livestock, if there is one?
So you've got Indian rice grass, alkali saccatone, and what was the third one?
Galleta.
Galleta. So actually, I would say Galleta's probably the best one. I would have to look at my range nutrition book that I've got. It is available in the archives. It's not in press anymore. But I believe Galleta is pretty good when it's not mature. Once it becomes mature, I believe it is pretty unpalatable. Alkali saccatone, Indian rice grass. I'm going to say that's a coin toss. Again, I would have to look in my nutrition book and find that out. I can look that up and answer that question better once I take a look at it. But yeah, there have been studies on those particular plants to see which is nutritious, more nutritious, what time of year they're nutritious, and things like that. So sorry I couldn't answer that better for you.
Right. No, it's not a problem. I always wondered that because, depending on the soil in your pastures, I noticed Indian rice is more on the sandy parts of it. And, it'd be great to, know which plants are best at what time to adjust your grazing plan. So that's the reason I asked that. And the second question, on the Navajo Nation, there's a lot, looking at your presentation, the grazing is heavy to severe. in some places, in most places. And you know, what about reseeding? Because during drought, you have times of dry periods and times of, you know, we get a lot of rain. Would reseeding be an alternative to help the range out, to bring the grasses that were once there back?
Absolutely. The issue we have with that is the same thing we're dealing with in this particular topic, is drought, right? It all depends on soil moisture and what we get. So we're going to be doing a lot of reseeding here in New Mexico because of the fires. I mean, it's one of those things where it all depends on precipitation. So there's different methods. I hate to discourage this, but it's about a 10% success in New Mexico. It's not a very good success in reseeding. You've got to time a lot of things just right to get vegetation back on the ground, because depleting the plant resources is only part of the problem. As soon as you deplete that, you start changing the soil composition and the soil what's the nutrients in the soil for those plants. You start getting erosion and things like that. And so that's why it's so hard. And that's why there's only a 10% rough success rate in New Mexico, is because the soils change so much once the plants are gone that it's hard to get that soil back to what it was. But I'm not going to discourage seeding. It's better to have seeds on the ground than not have them there, because it's just a matter of waiting for the precipitation to come and crossing our fingers that we get some to take place. Also, source your seeds locally, because local seeds are more adapted to the climate that we have here.
Okay, thank you, Casey.
Yes.
Well, thanks, Jesse, for that question. Casey, we do have another hand raised. Loretta, you feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Casey. That was a wonderful presentation. And I got into the drought situation severely, I believe, in the year 2017. 2016 was a good rating for us, plenty of rain, snow. And then all of a sudden it just went downhill, and I started recording, and I have a journal for each year, what we did during that day, and then I measure whatever forage I can think of and picture take. And that got me concerned, where we had to think whether we have to reduce at this point. And then also, like you said, you have to have a plans in place. Then by the time 2018, it was severe, where I just could not, I just couldn't bear coming back out there to see the livestock. So by 2019, we had to get a 1,000 gallon tank, and then we had to develop barrels, and then the flatbed, because we live about 60 miles from our home to our ranch. And so that's what we had to determine, the time management and then the expense as well. And then we started to look at each of the herds by the body score. So we knew then what had to be taken in soon, or either at a certain time for a market price. Then I find out that the market price was going down due to COVID that was coming up. So that made it hard. So I'm just wondering, how do you predict a good market price? I see the display from cattlemen from the land I look at. So we took our herd down there, and we got really bad price. So I said, what I did wrong, or was the display of the cattle cell that was displayed misguide? I don't know. And so now last year, we really 2 year we hurt really bad, but we managed to pull through, hauling close to 1050 gallons every 4 days. And then that's where we had to really down, cut our herds back up again. So at this time, today, me having all the record keeping and everything out, I gave my kids their time to determine what would you do. So I made them go out there with my husband and the grandkids and my kids. They all went out there, and they were so happy. And we have eight earth ponds, and all the 7 were a minimum, maybe for a good 2 weeks. And then 1 earth pond was an above average. So, but it's just too sad that we had to rotate them at the wrong time. So the one that has the huge earth pond, there's no livestock in there. So what do we do now? I said, do we move them now with the pairs in that particular pond? But then you look at the range size of it too. So we have to on each visit we have to have hay with us, and they feel comfortable, and so we know how many are be going to the auction this coming year. And I was just thinking what I did wrong again, and majority of my calf became steers. I said maybe it's the mamas that needs to be replaced, but then it's the wrong time to be buying a fresh herd. And with the way the drought's going, and this is the only time we got rain that came onto our ranch. Before that, it would rain way back. I think it was in May. Nothing. It was just dry. And I look at that the rain gauge that we have on our post, and we always measure it. And there's nothing so far until now. And we were blessed with some rain. I can't complain. We're still going to haul water. We're still going to provide feed to them. It is going to take a while to get our forage back up, because there's a certain area that are bared. And I'm trying to get to know these plants, what is good and what is not. If it's not good, then do we destroy them? I just need to find out to see whether we need them to keep the other forage plant in place or what. But it's just that we have a trouble ranch here that's in the Crown Point area, eastern area, that makes it difficult because of the land status. So we just have to go with what we have in place. So I learned a lot from the presentation with the drought that came on. I had to rely on the New Mexico Cattlemen, Stockmen catalog, and I got a lot of assistance from them, how to replace your storage tank, your water line, the tire trough. I mean, we hurt so bad, but we managed to pull it through without any help from our travel ranch program. But we learn. I'm learning. So I just want to let everyone know that today I just got some picture to view, and I'm going to go back out there this Saturday and Sunday, even though the rain's there. But I would rather be out there to know if I have to worry or release some stress on them and enjoy bringing out more feed to them, so that they'll be comfortable during this time. So right now I look at that monitor, I look on that, some kind of report system that I was told from one of the presentation. Then I check with the news, and that's how I say I don't believe the news. They don't know what they're saying, but sometimes I believe the news well, and then versus the report. So I thought I'd mention that to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that input, Loretta. Appreciate it. We actually have another question. It's a 2-part question from Ivan. Let's see. Is it best to reseed before the monsoon rains? And his second question is range rest better option than reseeding in the Southwest?
So I'll answer the first one. Is it best to reseed before the monsoon rains? Absolutely. So you can do that anytime during the winter. It's not going to hurt it. It depends on how you're seeding. Most rangelands, you're broadcast seeding and trying to incorporate those into the soil somehow. Some areas you can use a rangeland drill and get those in the ground. So, but yes, in the northern regions, you want to have it in before spring, especially when you're dealing with cool season grasses. So you'll want a seeding mix of both cool and warm season grasses, and you want to have those cool seasons in the ground before spring. The warm seasons, they can be planted later in the spring as long as you do it before the monsoon. So yes, you want to get those seeds on the ground. So as soon as moisture is available for them, they're available to germinate. Interesting with grass seeds, they have in general, the longer you go, they will deteriorate, but generally they have a 2 to 3 year soil residual life. So they can stay in the soil. So sometimes when we don't see them grow in the immediate, they will come up the second and third year. And that is not uncommon with seeding grass species. So what I tell everybody is be patient with seeding grasses, especially but it does take that moisture. So yes, do it before the monsoon rains. Your second question, range rest versus reseeding. Absolutely, rest is best, unless you don't have anything on the ground. If you've got limited vegetation on the ground, then rest won't do much besides bolster the current plants you have, but there's still not enough. So they're still going to get picked off by livestock. So it's best to reseed. But in general, I like to use that terminology, rest is best. So yes, resting is better than reseeding in the Southwest.
All right, well, thanks, Ivan, for that question. Okay, we actually have another question from Loretta. I think you forgot to put everyone. Where are the reseeding available? I want to reseed 2 years during COVID period, and I prayed for rain at that time, but I need information so reseeding plants can be implemented during this time. I don't know if it's a good question or not. Casey?
Yeah, I'm trying to find that question so I can.
Yeah, let me, it was just a direct message.
Okay, all right. So if she's looking for methods of, so the best resource I have for seeding methods and seed mixes in general is to, because it varies by specific area. So if you want to come up with a seed mix on your own, you can go to the soil website, or you can contact me directly and I can get you a list of your specific area on what species to seed there, or contact the USDA NRCS office, and they are a great source, and they do a lot of the it's in their name, right? The conservation stuff, where they're constantly reseeding different species on rangeland. Yeah, so again, timing is critical on that, on your seeding.
Okay, well, Loretta, you have your hand raised, so I believe you have another question.
No, I was trying to remove my hand. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, well, we'll conclude with that. We did have, Julie, listeners can go or can get general plant nutrition information from the plant database. So if you guys want to head on over to that website, she's going to be our next speaker for Grass Cash. She's the Rangeland Management Specialist for NRCS and the Northern Plains Climate Hub. So welcome, Julie. But thank you so much, Casey, for providing great information on drought management practices for many of our producers here and our listeners as well. So this information is really much needed. So deeply appreciate it. Thank you.